The Bo Xilais case was the biggest political scandal in China in 2012. Actually, it started in November 2011. On November 15th, 2011, a British businessman called Neil Hayward was found dead in a hotel room in Chongqing. He was a businessman in Beijing and he married a Chinese national, and there were so many foreigners in China, so his death just went unnoticed. The police in Chongqing, they ruled that he died of a heart attack. And then so his body was cremated without an autopsy, and then the case was settled. And then 3 months later, in February, there was a related case. The police officer who was in charge of the investigation suddenly disappeared. And the Wang Lijun went into the American consulate and sought political asylum. And he made the allegation that Neil Heyward was actually murdered by the wife of Bo Xilais, the party chief of Chongqing. And also he made allegations that Bo Xilais and his wife had taken bribes, and then they transferred money overseas. The allegations came as a huge shock to the whole country, and people believe that Bo Xilais was a very promising political candidate. And in March of that year, Bo Xilais was removed from office. And in April, he and his wife, they were detained on charges that they were involved with the murder of Neil Heyward and also on corruption-related charges. And in August, his wife, Gu Kailai, was put on trial. She was convicted of murdering Neil Heyward with cyanide, and she was given the suspended death sentence. And then in September, the police chief who went to the American consulate to seek for political asylum, he was also on trial. And then he was convicted of 15 years in prison. At this time now, and we're waiting for the trial of Bo Xilais, the party's anti-corruption body has initiated a series of investigations, and then they have reached certain conclusions that he is guilty, and they have turned over the case to the judicial body. The princeling, as you probably know, we refer to the party of princes, which means the children of senior communist leaders. The term was formed in the 1990s because after the student protest movement in 1989, all the communist leaders, the senior leaders who fought with Mao during the communist revolution, they got together and they decided that they should promote their own children to senior positions because these children, they are more trustworthy, they are more politically reliable. If they promote their own children, there won't be a defector like Zhao Ziyang or Hu Yaobang who would betray them. They felt like that was the case. In the ironic way that the Communist Party, they tried to establish new society different from the imperial rules, and in the end, they themselves became the self-proclaimed emperors. They want to pass the rule to their own children. Bo Xilai was one of them. He grew up in a very privileged family, and his father used to be the vice premier of China, Bo Yibo. But then during the Cultural Revolution, his father was persecuted by Mao. He was locked up in prison, and Bo Xilai, like our current party chief Xi Jinping, they were all persecuted because of their connections with their parents. And then Bo Xilai was locked up in a camp called the Red Concentration Camp. So he was inside there for 4 to 5 years. And then gradually, when his father came out again in 1979, 1980s, and he went to Beijing University and gradually moved his way up. He decided to enter politics, and he went to northeastern China, started as the county chief, gradually became the mayor of Dalian, and then became the minister of commerce, and then the party chief of Chongqing. And he was one of the ironical things about him is he was persecuted during the Cultural Revolution, but then he became a big follower of Mao's ideas, and we call him the neo-Maoist. Bo Xilai initiated this Singing Red and Smashing Black campaign in Chongqing It was very powerful and very popular with ordinary people because Singing Red enabled people to restore some of the confidence in the Communist Party. And also his campaign against organized crime enabled the police to actually crack down on the illegal crimes, smuggling, murder, and a series of corruption cases. But at the same time, he's just like any other communist officials. He abuses power and he used the campaign to persecute political opponents. And then he totally violated the legal procedures by persecuting people and also confiscating the big business people who were supposed to be not his friends. So that was the big issue that really brought him down. Gu Kailai is like Bo Xilais. They shared a very similar family background, and her parents were also senior communist leaders. Her father was a military general, and during the Cultural Revolution, both of her parents, they were persecuted. They were locked up away from home, and Gu Kailai and her 4 sisters, they didn't have parents. They lived all by themselves. She was very smart, and then after the Cultural Revolution, she entered Beijing University and then got a degree in political science and law. And then she was one of the first licensed lawyers in China. As you know, that China abolished the legal system or the lawyer system during the Cultural Revolution in the Deng era, and then China reinstated the lawyer system, and Gu Kailai was one of the few lawyers who passed the bar, and she set up her practice in Dalian and also later in Beijing, and she successfully fought a case on behalf of a Chinese company in the United States, and she wrote a book about it called Winning a Lawsuit in the United States. And ironically here is that in the book she criticized the American legal system, saying that the United States, using the O.J. Simpson as an example, she thinks that the American system is too cumbersome. And about 10 years later, she herself became a victim of the Chinese system, which she called very efficient. And then they put her on trial for 7 hours on a very complicated murder case, and then they reached the verdict. We talk about Gu Kailai as poisonous water because we trace the part of the history, as I mentioned earlier, that the communist society is supposed to be an egalitarian society, a new society. But if you study the whole case of Gu Kailai, you've noticed that nothing changed, even the same practice that happened many years, 1,000 years ago. So in the book we talk about how Gu Kailai has been blamed for all of Bo Xilais' case. If you look at Chinese history, during the Tang Dynasty, we have the Yang Guifei. She was blamed for wrecking dynasties. And then in modern history, you talk Madam Mao, Jiang Qing. During her trial, they blamed everything on Jiang Qing, as if during the Cultural Revolution, Mao had been asleep, and all the evil things were perpetrated by Jiang Qing. And nowadays, there are so many corruption scandals, and each time they always blame the mistresses. So there's long histories that each time something happens, they won't go examine the political system, like the Bo Xilai case. It is a power struggle, but it is the political system that really needs to be reformed. But then they immediately convicted Gu Kailai, thinking she was the real murderer, and then in this way, they successfully used her to get rid of Bo Xilai. We challenged the government verdict that Gu Kailai was solely responsible for the death of Neil Hayward. And we believe that the police chief, Wang Lijun, played a very critical role in the murder of Neil Hayward. He was an active participant. He helped orchestrate the murder, and also he manipulated Gu Kailai and made it happen because he had a real motive. He wanted a promotion, and he wanted Bo Xilai to help with his friends who were under corruption scandal, under investigation, and that was why he wanted Neil Heyward to die, so that he felt like he could control the Bo family. This was because after their trial, we talked with many government officials and then people who are familiar with the case and legal experts. We felt that the Chinese court, they never addressed some of the issues that which should be critical during the murder trial, and also they took advantage of the fact that Wang Lijun provided lots of evidence against Bo Xilais that would be very helpful in convicting Bo Xilais in the future. That's why they never pursued Wang Lijun's role in the murder. And secondly, we found out that many of the unaddressed issues, and which we believe that if the defense lawyers were allowed to address them, Gu Kailai might be let free, or at least we should know more details about the case, because there was no transparency and there was no due process. The scandal exposed a lot of the weaknesses in the Chinese political system. Right now, when China is at a crossroad, when economic development, for many years, China's economic development was able to maintain the party rule. But now, if you keep using the same old tactics, it won't work. And more, not only in the old days, people believed that it's the external forces that could rock the boat, but actually the danger lies within the party, and you don't have a fair competition system, and there will be more and more Bo Xilai. They're trying to compete for power, and then they will use extreme means to get the power, and also in order to suppress the coup d'etat efforts, there'll be more and more political power struggles, and then will cause more instability, and it could cause chaos, not only to China, but to the whole world.